Today's episode has been brought to you by Schedulicity.
And also by my 20-hour Yoga for Pelvic Health teacher training that is happening in Meaford, Ontario, September 19th to 20th, 2020. If you are thinking about flying in for this training or traveling here for this training, know that spaces are limited. There's already people signing up, and yes, there are some people flying in. So if you're a little bit concerned about what is it like to fly into Toronto and drive 2.5 hours to get to Meaford, Ontario, don't worry, there are other people in the same boat as you. So if you want more information, go to theconnectedyogateacher.com, look under trainings and events to find out more or to register. Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow, a mom of 3, a yoga teacher, and a trainer and consultant who works for yoga teachers. And this podcast was created for you. Today's exact episode has been created because of all of the questions that I've had from yoga teachers, either in our Facebook group. If you're not a member of our Facebook group, head on over to theconnectedyogateacher.com and you can see the join button right on our homepage. But also from the yoga teachers that I work with. And one of the most common questions that I get asked is, what are the expenses that I can claim? And how do I do the accounting side of things? We're in the midst right now of tax season here in the US and in Canada. Our deadlines are mid to end April to file our taxes. And as business owners, because that's what we are as yoga teachers, if we're out there and we're collecting money, we are business owners. We need to get our books in order in time for that. This can seem super intimidating. Today's episode is nothing about shame or blame or feeling bad about it. Today's episode is really to help you in this very essential part of running your business. I want you to listen to today's episode, have some questions answered, and feel like you can do your taxes correctly or choose the people to help you to do your taxes correctly. I am so excited to invite our expert on the podcast today, Kelly Christian, to talk with us about some of the finer aspects of bookkeeping. We dive into where to get started with sales tax, what expenses you can write off in your business, and even the difference between a bookkeeper and an accountant. Kelly also has some easy ways you can use technology to really simplify this process and streamline the money side of your business. After talking with her, I made some changes, even to my own business, and I am excited to tell you about those after the interview. So I'll make sure to fill you in on what I did for my own yoga business and my business in general. Whether you already have your books in order and you're ready to file your taxes, or maybe they're even filed, or if you're worrying about how to start on this episode is going to be an amazing resource for you. And don't worry if you are feeling like you need to take notes, but you're out and about, not to worry. The show notes are ready for you over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/154. And there you can find everything, the links that we talk about, clickable timestamps. This is made so that you can go back and click around and find what we were talking about in each and every podcast episode. Before we dive into the episode, I have a shout out of thanks to Lucy Weir, who is the author of a book called Love is Green, Compassion in Response to the Ecological Emergency over at Vernon Press. Lucy, thank you so much for writing in. Lucy sent a review that says, basically, I just want to thank you for your wonderful sharing of resources. I'm a yoga ND philosophy teacher and can't get to grips with the promoting side, but you really help. And then Lucy went on to tell me about her book, and she summed it up saying it's basically about yoga in the sense of union and love. So thank you so much for taking the time to write a review, Lucy. I'm so glad that the podcast is giving you some help with the promotion side of things. And I'm excited. Maybe today's episode will give you some help with the accounting and the bookkeeping side of things. I also want to give a big shout out of thanks to Schedulicity, who is not only the company that I use and love for my scheduling software, but they also sponsor the podcast. So let's hear from one of the amazing team members over at Schedulicity.
Hello, Connected Yoga Teachers. This is Michaela with the Schedulicity Hot Tip of the Week. Schedulicity is an amazing accounting tool. Your dashboard shows your weekly estimated revenue, the number of bookings you have, and the average revenue per booking. Enabling the payment add-on makes things even easier. Once you're connected to Stripe or Square, all your transactions will be listed on your payment screen, and you can select a date range, search by tender type or confirmation number, and export that information to an Excel document. With your schedule and your money this organized, you might have time to tackle something even tougher, like that weird junk drawer or your kid's closet.
Thank you so much, Team Schedulicity. I just had a little issue this week. I went to log in, couldn't find the thing that I needed, messaged really quickly. Someone got back to me very fast, and I realized I was just on the wrong page. I had already figured it out, but your team is always so nice just to write back and say, "It's okay, Shannon. It's Friday." These things happen. So thank you so much. Okay, connected yoga teachers, let's dive in and meet Kelly. Kelly is the owner of Kelly Christian and Company, and a certified professional bookkeeper and tax preparer with over 18 years of experience working with all types of small business owners. She describes her company as your numbers and systems savior. Kelly focuses on helping small business owners to create custom technology systems around their money to get their money system in place and their books under control. With a variety of packages from step-by-step help through an online course to custom setup, training, and guidance from Kelly and her team, she helps her clients forget about their bookkeeping so that they can focus on their business. A special little note here, Kelly is a fellow Canadian. So when I interviewed her, she was actually out in the mountains at her house in British Columbia. And so I just wanted you to know that Kelly is a fellow Canadian, and we do get into talking about HST and some Canadian taxes that we have here. So you need to check with your state or your province or your country, wherever it is. We have another episode that focused a lot on the US and accounting in the US. But there are some great similarities between these two episodes, and there are some questions to really ask the person who's helping you with your taxes, no matter where you are. So let's dive in and meet Kelly so that we can get really organized for this tax season. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast, Kelly. It's great to have you here today.
Oh, it's great to be here, Shannon. Thanks for having me.
I am excited that we get to dive in and talk about bookkeeping, particularly for our yoga teacher listeners who are all either running a small business, whether they know it or not, but dealing with some kind of income and expenses here.
Yeah.
So what got you into this? What sparked this?
Yeah, this was sort of a roundabout route that I started out doing business in university and then was doing, I was waitressing, and they asked me to come in and take in the back end of the bookkeeping on the back side, doing the cash outs and doing bookkeeping when they were gone in an old, like it was DOS computer stuff back in the day, right? It was just basically paper, but put on the computer. And then I got my job after I finished university with Tourism Victoria. I loved that, but had my son and everything changed, right? I'd have a baby and you're like, oh, well, changes everybody's priorities. So so we did that, had a couple kids, was lucky enough to be able to stay at home with them. We moved out here to the shoe shop from Vancouver Island, and then I got bored real quick. So I tend to go like that, right? So then I started picking up a little bit of the bookkeeping, for a couple local places that they needed somebody just to do basic stuff. So I just sort of started back into it from my earlier experiences, and sort of organically it kind of grew as my kids got older and I had more space. And then I was, treasurers of every sport and parent community, committee that they were on, of course. And then as they were coming into teenagers, all of a sudden everything grew more because I had way more space that a lot of people, I guess, maybe get lost in the empty nest syndrome. And I just grew into growing my business. And because we live in a really rural area, it ended up that I had a love for online marketing. I had decided, like, I'd learned that from being in there, new tech and all that kind of stuff. So it really quickly became clear that was a great way for me to be living in a really small town in the middle of nowhere, but being able to increase my client base and have, a very flourishing business and still live in this beautiful place that I do. So that's sort of been the journey that I came back around to using my very beginning of my business degree, that I decided I wasn't going to do economics for 3 years. So I went into tourism after that. Right. So,
Right.
But full circle. Yeah. It's kind of cool.
That's amazing. So for our listeners, because you can't see, Kelly already gave me a little tour. So she's in British Columbia and it is absolutely gorgeous there. So I can see why you'd want to stay at home and do this business. Is it you yourself doing the bookkeeping business now, or do you have other people hired as well?
I had started out with some overseas help just because I couldn't afford to do it any other way, right? So I hired a couple. One girl was with me for 4 years through Upwork in the Philippines, and she was fantastic. But it just sort of became there was hurricanes, or was this, and it was just there was issues, right? And so I've moved to having someone that's local, and it's so great. I finally got an employee. And I have a couple other subcontractors, but having an employee, I thought was going to be a really big. It is a big stretch, but I thought it would be really stressful. But it brings so much ease to my world that the stress piece is completely out the window, right? Because I don't have to worry about it. I know she's only working for me. She's got my best interest at heart. I've been very lucky to find a good employee, but I wouldn't look back from having a full-time contractor to moving into an employee. I would look back for that for a second.
Oh,
So
that's amazing to
yeah,
know.
it's been really cool. It's a tough jump. It's a really big mindset jump to get to that point.
Yeah.
And finding the right person makes all the difference too, right? But
Yeah.
it's been huge. Yeah.
Okay. What is the difference between a bookkeeper and an accountant?
So it can be sort of blurred. So where my particular role, I didn't go in and become an accountant and finish that piece because it was going to involve me living in a city or working in a city 2-hour return trip away when my kids were young and for 2 years. And I just wasn't prepared to sacrifice for that. So I did a whole, a big section of the training, but I wasn't going to go there. So I moved into the book. So I've got a lot of the accountant training, but I don't have the qualifications or the final paperwork to say I've got it done. So typically a bookkeeper, and you'll see this depending on the level of bookkeeper you're using. A lot of bookkeepers out there now are people that just take the information from you, they put it into an accounting system of some sort, they categorize the expenses, they categorize the income, and then at the end of the year, they might do your GST return or HST returns or sales tax returns for you. And at the end of the year, it goes over to an accountant or a tax preparer to do the taxes. So typically that's what you're going to get. With us, we do like the whole thing, right? Like I can do taxes. We give tax. So what you're not going to get from a bookkeeper largely, let's go that way, typically is any kind of information. If they're not preparing taxes, they don't have the insight to know about different tax expenses. They don't have the insight to say, hey, you know what, your income's getting up to this level. Maybe we need to look at changing your business structure. Or, hey, you should be paying your partner as an employee because your income's going to be too high and your tax percentages. Like they don't have that insight to give you that typically. So that's where your accountant would come into play, or your tax person who does your tax preparer will come into play and do that. The only issue being with that is that typically you don't see that person except for once a year. And
Right.
making those determinations really needs to be done a lot of time throughout the year. So if you're working with a bookkeeper that is just that basic data entry person that's just doing that piece, then I would suggest that you need to meet with your accountant or tax preparer at least maybe in September if you've got a December year end to go over where things are at, anything that needs to be changed, because that gives you a few months to make some adjustments before the end of the year. Like, your income's too high. So, and you had been thinking of maybe I needed to upgrade all my equipment in the yoga studio, right? Well, now would be the time to bring down your income and do it in before December versus doing it to the end. And if you don't have that insight from someone else, you might not know to do that.
Oh,
So
right.
that's sort of the, where that comes into play is that's the main difference. Typically you're going to find with a bookkeeper versus an accountant. In your ideal space, you want someone that can sit in the middle there, which is where I love to be. I love that piece in the middle because I do send more complicated corporate tax returns too. I have an accountant that we work with and he's fantastic. And because that's his role, right, is to do those more complicated pieces.
Mhm.
But I'm able, within my role as a bookkeeper, to give people that advice all year long, right? Like we always, every month when they get their statements, we go through, hey, like this is where your income sits. Like you need to be looking at, this is what's going to happen. You need to incorporate by November or you're going to pay a ton of taxes, right? So,
Right.
and if you can find someone like that, that's who you want, because then you don't have to, it's not the big disconnect, right? They know your day to day and they also know your goals, they know your life, they know, where you're headed. And it's hard to find, I will say, someone that does that, right? So that's what you're ideally looking for. Someone that has a bit more breadth than just someone that's just doing data entry, right?
Right.
But if not, make sure you've got a really good relationship with your accountant or tax preparer, and make sure you're meeting with them at least one other time before the end of the year to go through that kind of stuff. And find the same person. They should have sort of the heart. I like to say it's a Dave Ramseyism. I don't know if anybody knows of him, but
I know
he's
Dave
like
Ramsey.
yeah, right. He's a budgeting guru, and he's a really neat guy. But he always says you're looking for someone to find someone with the heart of a teacher. So
Mm,
that is a really good, I like to share that, that's who you're looking for to be there on your money journey with you, like to partner with you, accountant, tax preparer, bookkeeper,
right.
heart of a teacher, right? That's what you're looking for.
Okay. So if our yoga teachers are listening, I think this is going to go out at the beginning of 2020. So I feel like it'll be before our
Yeah.
tax time here in Canada, our big tax time. And so if they're thinking, oh my gosh, I need to get my bookkeeping under control, what are some of the
Yeah.
things that they can do themselves? Like what, if you look at a business, you're like, wow, you could really save some headaches if you just do this.
Yeah. So starting out, it depends on so my specialty is I work with a lot of island businesses, right? So they really don't have money coming in directly. And I'm imagining, if with your yoga teachers, some of it's going to be cash and, maybe being paid by debit with using Square perhaps. But a lot of the rest of it is still going to be electronic payments. And it's that piece that gets a little sticky that a lot of people miss. Capturing expenses that are involved in that, right? So they're just taking the end of the month statement and not really catching the sales minus the fees. So one thing I would really get a handle on, number one, the biggest piece is making sure you're collecting and make sure you're billing, right? So those are the two big ones. Make sure you get the money that you deserve. And then number two is making sure you're accurately reporting your income, because you don't want to pay more taxes than you have to. And then number three is make sure that you've dealt with the sales tax piece. Because if you're offering yoga services, then you should be charging GST, HST, depending on your province, once you hit $30,000. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind, that if you get there and you're not tracking anything until year end, but you hit that point in October and you're not charging anybody for those 3 months and you should have signed up, CRA will make you go back and pull that out of your income if you haven't signed up in the right time. So staying on top of what that number looks like is a really big deal. If you're growing to that stage, when you're just starting out, it's not. But be sure that you're making sure you're capturing all your income from all your different sources. Because some people forget, oh yeah, this person paid me. I got 6 people that pay me through PayPal, and don't even think to put that in as income, right? Because that money, you maybe buy something using your PayPal money that's in there, and that just sort of disappears, right? So what actually lands in your bank account isn't necessarily what the people paid. Someone may have paid you $100 for work, and then you've bought something, who knows what, for $75. When the money transfers into your bank account, you only get $25 of that. And if you're not paying attention, you might claim that as the amount of income if you're just going off your bank statements, but that's not accurate. And the same for the expenses you might miss because you're not seeing them drop into your bank account, right? So PayPal is a really sneaky one. If you're getting any payments via PayPal, it's really sneaky and you got to be really careful with it. Yeah, and then the rest of the pieces is just making sure you save everything. Save all your receipts, because you never know what might be a write-off that you didn't anticipate to start with.
Right. Okay. So this is amazing. I want to go back and just clarify for our
Yeah.
people who are outside of Canada. The CRA is our Canada Revenue Agency.
It's the IRS, yeah.
Yeah, it's the IRS of Canada. And also just this whole thing of our sales tax after the 30,000 is super important. So can you
It's a big deal.
clarify when someone, say there's that 12-month period where, say the year before, maybe their income was 20,000 and then it skips to 30,000, where in there do they need to be charging that HST?
So the rules are actually, and I'll give you a link once we finish that we can put in with this, just so we can get exactly, because I'm not going to have the exact wording, and I don't necessarily follow it to a T because it doesn't make a lot of sense, in all honesty. And it's just, they just want you to register once you hit that point. But
Right.
the lining is that if it's $30,000 in one consecutive quarter if you hit that. So it can be across sales, it can be across fiscal years. Like it can be from October through to January of it doesn't make any sense. And it's really hard to track. So I don't do that with my clients. I just do within one fiscal year. So from January 1 through to December 31st, assuming that a sole proprietor is, if a small business in Canada, that's the way you should be starting out. You have to have a December 31st tax year. If you're, incorporated, then you might have a different year end, right? But basically it's from year start to year end. When you hit that $30,000, you've got 30 days to register for GST. Right. And then start charging, and they'll backdate it to whatever that date is. So let's say you hit it in September, like by the end of September, you've hit 30,000. You register for GST or HST as of October 1st, you have to start charging it. So even if you don't do your registration a little bit later, you've got to start charging right away. Right. Otherwise, they'll take it and pull it out of they'll make you pay it even though you didn't charge it.
Right. It'll come out of the income that you had and you'll owe the government that. So it's super important that we're tracking that.
Is.
Okay,
yeah,
that's
it's
good.
A big deal. Yeah.
And I love that you also brought to mind PayPal and all of our online payments. I know this happens with my own business. If I don't keep track of those PayPal fees or my Stripe fees or whatever, you're right. It can really get lost.
Yeah.
You said
it's more, and it's PayPal. It's more the expenses coming out of the income that I find people get that becomes a really big mess to clean up at the end of the year. Right. If they're not paying attention. Yeah.
Is there an easier way to deal with that then so that it's not coming out of there?
Honestly is just to not pay for, if you're using it as your main payment source, I would not put if you're not using any kind of software that pulls that information in and breaks it out for you, if you're doing it manual, I would just not use PayPal as a payment source to buy things with. Because then you can count on all that money that comes into your bank account is sales, right? It's income but a lot of people, real life doesn't work like that, right? Because they use it as a payment source. So I know that, I don't work in that world of airy-fairy accountants, right? Like I work with, and I have a real life too, so I know how it goes. So the best way is to make sure if you're using PayPal a lot, and so depending on, what kind of work, I'm assuming, unless people are doing consulting, it's going to be like sole currency. If you're in Canada, you're charging in Canadian dollars. That being said, if you're in Canada and you are charging a multi-currency, I will say right now, caveat out there, do not use QuickBooks. Don't use it. Don't get started with it, especially if you're running PayPal multi-currency, because it is a nightmare. People get it just, there's a variety of reasons I can go into, but probably more than people want. If they want to ask, we can do a whole other thing on this. But in the US, it works fantastic because they're using sole currency. It's like their most popular tool. Here in Canada, QuickBooks treats PayPal coming in, so it brings in the transactions from PayPal. And if it's a bank account, and it's for just without the PayPal piece, it's not bad. But it's a lot of manual work that other options you don't have to do. But with the PayPal, what it does is it brings in, if you have a $50 sales charge in US dollars and a $50 charge in Canadian dollars, it brings it in as if both are exactly the same amount, which they obviously are not, because they have to be in Canadian dollars. So I have pulled apart and cleaned up so many messes in there because people don't know that. They go, oh, look, I can get a feed from my PayPal. And then at the end of it, and I'm like, and I'm looking at their statements and they don't even ever match, because that $50 US charge should have come in as like $75 Canadian, and it doesn't. So it's just a super weak point, but it's very specific to us Canadians. And a lot of people just don't know. And if they're listening to other people who are American, they're talking about all this, it works fantastic in the States because you're not dealing with multi-currency, right? And they also can automate so much more with rules and just having things getting entered automatically. So our bookkeeping is more complex here, and especially in our provinces where there's split sales taxes. So you've got a GST, PST component, because you have to actually have those receipts and make sure you're recording once you end up having to charge GST. Before that, you don't have to worry about tracking that piece. Right. But when you get to that point, you've got to manually handle those receipts to make sure you're getting those credits towards what you have to pay inaccurately, right? So there is people go, oh my God, it's so expensive to get this done here. Well, it's just that much more work. And that's, we can thank our government for that piece, right? So
you and I could start talking politics now. It's pretty fresh after our election.
Yeah, no kidding. But yeah, so it's just the differences between the way the two countries and because we're so multi-currency, because we're selling a lot into other countries, right? Typically. So.
Okay. A few questions now popping up.
Yeah.
What do you suggest people use then if they're not using QuickBooks, if they're Canadian?
If they're Canadian, so the only one that I recommend is Xero. It's not the cheapest option by any stretch. So it's Xero. It's a Australian-based program, and they deal with VAT, right? They have a sales tax, GST, same as we do. So it's really well, and it's the same thing. They are very similar to us, that they're selling a lot in US dollars and in euros. So it's a great product. It's becoming very popular now, especially within Canada. And you may not have heard of it because it's, if you're not in that world, it's not. QuickBooks is always everywhere, right? And that's just the reality. But Xero it's a more expensive tool, although QuickBooks has raised their prices lately, so they're really close, so like $5 apart, I think now. So, but if you're going to be doing sales tax, it is the tool, because basically it brings in everything as separate currencies. Like you can have a PayPal Euro, you can have a PayPal Canadian, you can have a PayPal US, and then the money gets transferred between each of those really cleanly. So you don't have to, like I've got a couple clients that are working, that we're doing it manually in spreadsheets. And each time there's a transaction, so the sale, and they're calculating the exchange gain or loss. So this is going to get real technical, but basically when you make a sale, you still have to convert that sale into Canadian dollars, even if it's in US dollars. So at that point, you have either a loss or gain based on what the amount of the exchange is. Then when you bring that money into your bank account, when it's paid, you have another one there. So you should have these spreadsheets with all these 5 transactions for each sale to make sure they're capturing that information, where you just transfer it and it does it for you. So for me, it doesn't make any sense. An extra $10 a month is just not worth, what's your time worth, right?
Yeah.
So.
Oh, that's amazing. You might have me switching. I'm using QuickBooks right now. And that's exactly what happens. Like at the end of the year, I have to look back at my Stripe and my PayPal, and
So it's a much better tool. But again, if you're small and you're starting out, you may not need that yet, right? And so it is like it's not they don't have really a starter option in it, where the multi-currency is like your top end plan, right? So it's not. It's running, because it's US dollars. It's running about $40 a month. So cash flow is always an issue when you're starting out. So it may or may not be something you can afford. But it's definitely something to look towards if you're going to be using multi-currency, right? Of any.
Right.
If it's only a few transactions a year, it's no big deal. It's not worth that, right? But
right. So then our American listeners, they could stick with QuickBooks. It's like it will serve everything they need. And are there any free options that you would suggest? Or are you just like, what, if you're Canadian, use Xero, or if you're using
I use Wave with a few couple clients, and I really don't like it. I don't like the way it reports, and it's not, it works, but you get what you pay for, right? With that stuff. FreshBooks is awful. It doesn't do any kind of reporting. So if you're going to move and you try to give, I've just moved a client over to Xero for that very reason, because we're going in and trying to do reports for her accountant to do taxes, and they're just not there. There's no balance sheet. And so the balance sheet, we'll just quickly, I won't go heavy into this, but that's the spot where you see the numbers that get carried forward from year to year. So what your bank balance was from one year to the next year, what money you owe people, and what money they owe you. And I know they've just come up with a new version of FreshBooks that does offer some of that. And I haven't delved into it just because I have such a bad, it's great for invoicing. If you're using it for invoicing, it's fantastic. But it's not great for being able to get accurate numbers to your tax preparer. So if you're getting taxes done, you give them what you would have saved by not using a little bit more expensive software, you're going to pay at the end of the year by them having to go through and recreate basically everything to be able to get accurate tax returns done. So you're not really saving, right? So it's sort of a short-term gain for a long-term, loss, right? Like it's just playing that piece, although it's a really simple software to use. So I would rather people use that than nothing.
Okay.
But no, as you grow, you're gonna outgrow it, and you're gonna end up needing to move into something better to be able to get the information you need out of it, and to be able to get your taxes done properly. So
Right.
yeah. Yeah. So those are the two. There's other ones out there. And like I said, tracking is better than nothing, but even a spreadsheet, if you're going to go there, I'd honestly rather use a spreadsheet
Right. To be
almost,
able to
right?
see, like, here are the expenses. Right.
It works really
Like,
great, right? Like it's pretty easy. So yeah.
yeah. So, what are the expenses that we should be tracking? You said keep track of our receipts. I find it
Yeah.
really challenging with paper receipts and now online receipts. I now have a system,
Yeah.
but I don't know if you can add into that. And then, so how do we save them really well? And what ones do we save?
So it depends on sort of where you guys are at. In the US, they have, if they have a digital picture of the receipts now, they don't have to save the paper copy. In Canada, that is not the case, of course. They still want us to make sure we have paper copies of everything, unless you get the receipt digitally start with. So if it comes to you by email, or it's or you pick it up off a portal for a membership or something, then you do not have to save those in paper format. Anything like your gas receipts, your food receipts, anything that's off, staples, those all still have to be kept. Not that they ever ask for them that way anymore at all. It's just, but you have to keep them. So there's some really cool tech, and obviously you can tell that I've got a bit of a slant that way because I just, we're all too busy, especially if you're running your business. You don't have time to be manually dealing with this stuff, right? So the tool I use when I collaborate with my clients is called HubDoc,
Okay.
HUBDOC, and it's basically an online filing cabinet. So what it does is you can connect your bank accounts, you can connect your credit card, you can connect your phone bills, your hydro, you can connect GoDaddy, like you can connect all sorts of really cool options. And it will, once you go in and you just basically like logging into your online account for whatever the service is, then going forward, it automatically pulls all those statements. Anytime there's a new statement, it pulls it in for you, and it files it, and it OCRs it, which is optical character recognition, and it pulls out the date, the invoice amount, the who it's to, like all of that. It's super spectacular. There's an app for your phone you can take pictures of your receipts with, and it automatically uploads. And you get an email forwarding address. So if you're get an electronic email, you just hit forward and it sends it off and it puts it right in there and it files it all for you.
Ooh. What is the charge for it?
It's 25 Canadian a month, so it's super cheap. So if they
Right.
do anything, I'd rather use the spreadsheet and do that.
Well, I'm thinking that I hire someone to like go through and pull out like a bookkeeper to
Yeah,
move my stuff over to Dropbox, but this
yeah.
sounds like I
It
could
does it
invest that money
automatically.
and it would do it.
Absolutely. It's amazing. And then you can also do a backup. I do with all my clients. We back up to Google Drive or Dropbox. And so it grabs that OCR document and copies it into, so you've got a secondary backup as well. It's fantastic. So that is the one I usually recommend before even going into accounting software, that you just get in a real habit and you're not got folders in your email and you don't got folders over here. And
Right.
then you have to take the time to rename every document. This does it for you. Like
Yes.
it's a no brainer, right? So there is another piece of software called Receipt Bank. It's more expensive. And it doesn't pull in like the bank statements and that kind of piece. So it's depending on the uses that people have got as their business grows. If they're having multiple people submitting expenses and they need to know who submitted what, it's a better tool for that. Both of them connect directly to QuickBooks and Xero. So once you get it in there and you teach it, sort of every time SO comes in, it's a fuel bill or Chevron or whatever it is, then you can teach it that it'll automatically code that as an expense and send it through to your accounting software. So there's some real automation that can go with that. Way more for the Americans though, like they've got it so great because this can be completely automated for them. Whereas it's like, oh right, no, I was in Alberta, so I've got GST, but now I'm back in Ontario now, so it's HST. So it's just not
Right.
the same, right? So,
Yes.
but it does automate things. So that piece. And if you're not using that, then doing a Dropbox or a Google Drive and just making sure you're saving like a PDF of everything and naming it and getting a really good file naming convention.
Okay. The other question I have for you is, what receipts should we be saving? Like, what can we count as expenses
Mm.
and what can we not?
So that's a really cool one. And if you'll know you've got a good bookkeeper or accountant, and especially being in a yoga practice, if they have suggested to you or allowed you to put through candles, crystals, essential oils, things like that aren't necessarily normally considered business expenses. If they haven't suggested that, you might want to look for somebody that does, because those are truly business expenses, right? Like that's part of the yoga practice. It's part of that whole holistic wellness piece. And a lot of people just don't know, right? Like the people that you might work with, they're not in that world, so they don't understand. Like that's not part of their mentality to even know what that is, let alone know that it could be a business expense, or they don't care to do the learning, right? So that's one piece. So there's some really different alternative kind of pieces. Like I tell my clients, save everything. And if you're working with a bookkeeper and accountant, save everything you think might even possibly be within the realm of an expense that you use for your business, right? And don't sort of discount things. And then, because you can always take that stuff away and get rid of those receipts. But with the yoga, I would look at some alternative types of things. You can write off any online subscriptions or any subscriptions to wellness magazines or, training that you do as far as, to furthering your practice. But even if it's mindset as a business owner, right? Like there's all sorts of, meditation apps. There's tons and tons of things that you might consider personal development, but developing you as a person also develops you as a business owner. So I tend to stretch that gray a little bit in that kind of area, because I think it definitely, the biggest piece with the expenses is to be sure that you can justify them. If an auditor comes, and they won't ever come to your house, but if they do a review and they say, well, what about this? And you can say, I use this for this. And you can stand there and honestly, or not even on whatever it looks like, right? You can stand there and say, no, this is a justifiable expense because of this.
Right.
That's all you need to be able to do in any audit I've ever been through. So,
So I'm thinking of one question that yoga teachers always ask is, can I claim my yoga clothing? And I think that's a really gray area. So do you have any thoughts on that?
It's no clothing.
Right.
It's very black and white in Canada on that one. There's no clothing unless it's a uniform and it's got a label. Like if you've got labeled yoga clothing for your business and it's got your logo on it and you sell it also to other people, or your other staff have to wear it, and it's a uniform, then you can write it off. Otherwise, no clothing ever.
Right. But then yoga studios, if they were buying clothing and then selling it, then they could.
Yeah,
claim
because
that.
it would just be one, like that would be part of their yoga stock, right? So you wouldn't claim it sort of that way out of the So, but you would have to require that everyone that works there wears it, because that's sort of that's the only way they close that down, is it has to be a uniform versus just clothing. So
right.
What about any of the other tools, any other mat, like anything else you're using, can totally be
So our fuel to drive to class, what about that?
No, because so the rules with the fuel and the travel costs are, if you have a studio and that's your main place of business, you can't claim. It's basically the way you look at it is you can't claim anything you wouldn't be able to as an employee. So as an employee, you're not able to claim your clothing you have to wear to work. As an employee, you're not able to claim your gas as you drive to work. So as a business owner, you aren't able, if you've got a studio or a storefront, you cannot claim your travel back and forth to that spot. You can claim if once you get there, if you go out and go to a meeting with someone, or if you go out from there and go to pick up office supplies, you can claim that travel, but you can't claim the back and forth from home to business. And then if you have a business storefront or a studio, you aren't allowed to claim home office expenses. It can be done, but it usually gets denied. You're allowed sort of one or the other.
Right.
So, right, and you can maybe claim a very small portion of home business if you're a sole proprietor in Canada, if you've got a studio. But, if it's just a studio and there's no space for office type activities there, but you'd really have to justify that one hard if you got reviewed, because that's the fuel and the home office expenses are the ones that get the most reviewed and the most denied, because they're mostly done wrong. So people, and if you're claiming fuel, make sure you've got a log, because if you don't, they'll just take away those expenses.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what
So,
about our teachers that travel to, like some of our teachers travel to people's homes or to a
yep.
corporate
Yep.
place?
Yep. No, that's fair. It's just if it's a studio. You just
Right.
can't, like, if you've got an ongoing office or studio that's consistently the same, then you can't travel. But anything else, yeah, if you don't have a studio and you just do home visits or whatever that looks like, all of that travel is, but make sure you're tracking it. And you only sort of have to do, now they've made it in Canada here that you only have to do sort of a three month window within a year of tracking. So
Right.
you could get, and that gives you basically an average of your normal travel patterns for the year. And then, so what you're trying to do there is get a percentage of business versus personal, for the automobile expenses, right? So let's say, it ends up being 30% business and 70% personal. Well, then all your fuel, everything else, you know that it's 30% of that is what we can claim on taxes
Right.
versus, right? So that's what they want to see. And honestly, if you go in with a 3 month sort of vehicle log that's mostly done, they're going to just go, yeah, okay, you're good, because nobody does it. And they're looking for, seriously, nobody does. And they just go, you got no log. We're going to take your, those expenses, and you're going to have to pay that back in your taxes. If you got a log, they go, okay.
Yeah.
So,
My accountant made me put a log in my car.
yeah. Yeah. No, and it can be really as simple. And I found when I was doing mine, like, there's apps for, if you want to do that. Like, I don't have them off the top of my head, but there's some apps that track via GPS in your phone.
Right.
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 So there's options there. But I found what I used to get they're little Hallmark calendar books. They get them at the drugstore, and this little, like 3x3 book. And I would, back in the day before I, had a phone, I would just go in there and mark business and what the auto reading was. So,
Mhm.
whatever it was. And then when I switched from business to being a personal, then I would write the auto reading there. So then you just need to, but all you need to track is the business portion. So you don't need to track every single trip. If you're going in, like for us out here, we live in the middle of nowhere. So if I'm going to town, I always stop at an office supply place and get something for my office. So then even if it's a personal trip as well, I can write that off for business, right? So that's a little inside tip there for
Oh, that just is fueling my Staples addiction.
exactly. Just make sure you got a receipt to prove that trip, right? And so, like with us, there's no store around here to do that anyway. So I've got to go all the way the 2-hour return trip to go and get anything. So
Yeah.
if I'm going to go, I go to Costco. I do everything else, but I still can write that trip off as business because I did hit Staples and grab some stuff. So, but basically, what I would do is that day I would do my starting, tracking my mileage. I would go to town, do my thing. And then, like in the olden days, when I used to go to people's houses, I would maybe come back, but then I wouldn't leave for another 2 days. But then I would go to a client's place and do the bookkeeping and come back. And then I would have to drive my kids to football that night. So I would take the reading before I left for football.
Right.
Right. So I wasn't doing it every day during the tracking. It was just the change of use. So when you change from one mode to the other,
Right.
that's the
Okay.
easiest way. You don't have to do every trip.
Right.
So
That's
yeah,
really smart.
yeah, yeah,
So it sounds like, I love how you said find an accountant or a bookkeeper who knows what you can and cannot claim. So I
yeah,
think that it's so wise for our yoga teachers to establish that
yeah,
for their area, like their state or
yeah,
province and
yeah,
country,
yeah,
and then their particular business, because you were
yeah,
saying like clothing is fine for a studio, but not for this. And so it really
yeah.
is. Do people ever reach out to you and just say, can you help me like establish what I can and cannot claim?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I've got people that I work with in all sort of levels, right? That it's whether I do full bookkeeping or we help them set up a system and then they move into running it themselves, or it's just, like I need help just even getting my business set up and make sure it's set up properly without even the bookkeeping piece. Because it's really complicated. There's so many different hoops to jump through in the beginning. And, do I incorporate, which so many people do too early in Canada, very different piece in the States. But there's just so many little pieces, and you're usually trying to raise a family or not, but typically that's the space, you're getting things going, you're being pulled from 5 different directions, and you're trying to not only run a business, get it started, make sure there's enough money coming in to pay the bills, and having enough time to figure all that out it's just such a stretch, right? And the added expenses of paying for that is usually a struggle in the beginning too, right? So, but what I would say about finding someone, just make sure they're open-minded enough that they're willing to do the work to find out what you can and can't, and they're they care enough to go in and make sure that they're doing the best by you by finding all those sort of little pieces that could be an expense, right? That's the big piece. A lot of people get in, and not necessarily all big firms are like that, but they get into an accountant firm or a bookkeeping, or they go into an online service that's cheap, like one of there's several out there, but they're just doing everything the same. They're not helping people really optimize their business. And in the end, that yes, you might save some money on the servicing, but you probably are missing out on a whole lot of other pieces that like expenses that you may not know. And if somebody doesn't tell you, you may not even consider that that's an option, right? So, so keep them in mind. But yeah, you want somebody that's going to work with you, that's going to help teach you, right? That's another piece. It doesn't matter who you're working with. They shouldn't, you shouldn't feel like they're talking down to you. You shouldn't feel like, you have to be perfect and never have any personal expenses mixed with your business expenses. And like that, you get a lot of people that live in that world of just numbers, and they're really not great with people. And and that's truly like, a good surgeon, a good accountant is very much the same. Their bedside typically isn't amazing, right? But on your day-to-day, as far as the bookkeeping and that kind of piece, you should have somebody that you can go to with the dumbest questions ever, and you never feel dumb, right? That's what you're looking for, someone that will do that, and help you with those silly things, because they're out there. We all have them.
Yeah.
So,
well, this has been so good. This is so much information. If people want to reach out to you and check out your work, or possibly work with you as a bookkeeper, how do they do that? What's the best website for them to go to?
They can just go to my main website, which is www.kellychristianandcompany.com. But and so on there right now, there's some blog posts and stuff. I work on that, but I struggle on that side. People struggle in their bookkeeping. I struggle in my marketing side.
Right. You're like, I've got the bookkeeping down. It's the blog post.
Yeah, no, staying up with all that stuff. So anyways, but I've also got some really cool stuff coming up that I've got moving a lot of my, sort of putting everything into this really cool membership portal, where I've got going to have a big free option there that's going to have lots of free training, and like all the videos and Facebook Lives and things that I've done will all be housed sort of in one spot. So that will come live. So if you go to my website and just sign up for my newsletter list, which hopefully comes out once a month, but it's a work in progress. So you're not going to get inundated, but it'll give you access to this really cool portal once I get it finally up and running. So that's someplace I would love to direct people to, is get to the website, get on that list, and I'll give you access to that information, because there's tons there like this that you can pick up, and you maybe don't even need to pay for it, right? Until you're ready, you can get the information you need.
Okay. Well, we'll also put a link to that in our show notes. So when it's ready, if you can send it to me, I'll make sure to add it.
That would be fantastic.
Is there anything else that you would like our yoga teachers to think about when they're thinking about their accounting and their bookkeeping?
The biggest thing is just when I say to people, just find some system that's wherever you struggle. And I know a lot of people struggle in like figuring out the receipts and expenses, right? So I think if you can do one thing, get a consistent way of handling your, and especially because we get so much online and it can be so overwhelming. Find a consistent way of handling that first. Get that done. And again, make sure you've got your money piece figured out. So you're getting money from people and you're recording that properly. And then just get those expenses at least filed, get them at least, like whether you can use HubDoc. And I still think it changed my world. It changes the world of most of my clients. Get into a piece of software like that. It's inexpensive. Then come the end of the year, even if you don't do your bookkeeping all year, everything is there for someone else if they need to help you with it, or you, and you're not having to go back. If you get reviewed or audited, everything is there to give to someone else. And you're going to save yourself so much time and grief in either case, if at least you have all of that done, because you're not having to, deal with that in January and pull all those pieces back from a year ago, right? So that would be the piece I would say. Get some solid systems. Don't necessarily move into a piece of software. A good spreadsheet works great. If you're tracking it, you don't have to jump into all the bells and whistles, but get that piece under control.
Right. Okay. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for this, Kelly. This has been such a lot of great information.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you, Shannon.
Well, connected yoga teachers, how was that? I want to hear from you. What was your key takeaway? If you want to share, you can do so in our Facebook group. The Connected Yoga Teacher group is what you'll search for, or go to our homepage, theconnectedyogateacher.com, and you can join right from there. Or you can also share in the show notes. Down at the bottom, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, there's a place where you can add your comments. And I'd love to hear what you learned or something you did in your business, or maybe there's something that you feel you could add to today's episode as well. You can put it all in the comments there. So I promised you an update of what happened in my business, and I want to get really real with you here for a minute. I finished this interview with Kelly and then turned around immediately and said, what would be involved for me to hire you? I realized when she was talking a lot about the tools that she uses and the information that she was sharing, I was realizing that she could save me time and money if she set the system up properly for me. So I asked her, what would it be like if I just pass this all over to you? A lot of my receipts are online. What would that look like? And I have to report back, there were two things that really happened with this. So I did this episode a while ago. It was before the end of the year we talked. And the very first thing was a lot of vulnerability came up when I was sharing my numbers. When I was sharing, here's a place where I was super organized with my accounting. And this place over here is very messy and not organized. And also just taking a review. And Kelly was great to be very kind about this. She didn't in any way have any judgments. I just want to acknowledge that when we go to pass our accounting over to someone else, it can make us feel vulnerable. So there was some discomfort for sure for me. And now I am super excited because this week I just passed over a couple more things there's Kelly and one other person on her team, Dixie. I just passed them over to both of them and just said, also, find the numbers here, help me here. How can you help me here? And it's just been really liberating as well. So there has been this, yes, I had to get vulnerable. Yes, I had to invest in this. But I'm excited because they're getting everything organized in a way that we are going to start talking about my money more often. So at least monthly, and Kelly talked about this, talk to your person who prepares your taxes before the end of the year. And I have to say that's probably the biggest thing that I'm working on now. I would be okay with looking at my money stuff maybe quarterly and definitely at the end of the year, but I want to sit down and visit, what does it look like when things are kept up to date monthly or weekly even? So I'm excited about that, and I will keep you in the loop when this conversation comes up. If you ever have questions for me, don't hesitate to reach out. I have a voicemail button on my website, and I love to answer those. So if you go to theconnectedyogateacher.com, over on the right-hand side, you can ask me any questions. Maybe it's another podcast episode that will come out, or maybe it will be part of a Q&A episode. Speaking of which, next week is the Q&A episode. I am so excited because a lot of you have sent me questions. We're compiling them. We're getting them all ready, and that's coming out next week. If you want to hang out in person, let's do that. The Toronto Yoga Show is coming up April 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th in Toronto, Ontario. I am going to be there. Amanda McKinney and I are presenting on the Friday. I'm super excited. We're talking about how to fill your yoga classes. Let us know if you're coming, and let's plan to connect and meet up there. Also, the Yoga for Pelvic Health training is happening in Meaford, Ontario, September 19th and 20th. And if we can't hang out in person, let's hang out online. Let's get together. I still have consultation call openings. I think there are openings for February and March. I just had to check. Yes, it will be February when this episode comes out. So this month and next month, if you're listening in real time, and you can go to theconnectedyogateacher.com and look under Work With Me to find out how to book those. Huge gratitude to our team over here, the Connected Yoga Teacher team. You are amazing. You make this podcast happen. You make magic happen in the Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group. You really help me in so many ways. So I want to say very huge thank you to the whole team. Also, thank you, dear listener. This podcast exists because you listened. And so I want to know, on top of, what did you take away today? What are you thinking? All right, I took this nugget and I'm going to try it in my business. I also want to know, what will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?